Okay, our third panel will focus on the dangers of synthetic drugs and their trafficking patterns. First, we'll hear from Dr. Eric Wish. Dr. Wish is Director of the Center for Substance Abuse Research at the University of Maryland at College Park, Maryland. Dr. Wish is also an Associate Professor at the University of Maryland's Criminology and Criminal Justice Department. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Chantal Linder. Dr. Linder is the Section Chief of the Synthetic Drugs and Chemicals Section's Diversion Control Division for the Drug Enforcement Administration. Her responsibilities include managing a group of agents, diversion investigators, and program analysts who work together to assist field investigations involving the trafficking of synthetic drugs and chemicals. Dr. Wish.
Do I have to push anything? Or am I on? Is this good? Okay. Good morning, members of the Commission. It's really a privilege to come here and talk to you. I have to warn you.
I'm afraid it's a red light showing. It's not a green light. So, is it on?
I don't know.
There it is. Okay. We're going. We're good. Okay, thanks.
So I have to repeat what I said?
Now it's green. Thank you.
Okay. I'm green with envy, I guess. So look, here's, I wanted to warn you. I have sort of a foreign accent. I have a Boston accent. So some people...
We're used to it around here.
You are?
Yeah.
You know, I once went to a meeting of all the police commissioner, and Roach and Newman Flanagan, all these people from Boston, because we were going to set up a program there, and I said I'd be cute. So I said, I'm so glad to be in my hometown, so I can talk to you, and you'll all understand my accent. They did this. What accent? So anyway, but to just prove my accent, Commissioner Barkow, I bet that's not the way you usually hear your name spin.
My mom says it that way.
Okay. So anyway, I run CSER. I've been running it for 26 years. It's an interdisciplinary research center at the University of Maryland. And in listening to the prior panels, I decided we have the easy job. We define the problem. You have, and most of the people in the room have the problem of trying to fix the problem, which is much more difficult. But anytime we can feed scientific information into policy, that we want to do that and try and inform the debate. So just to tell you a little about me, I was a visiting fellow at NIJ in the Department of Justice in the 80s, launching the drug use forecasting, which later became DUF, which later became ADAM, which is based on collecting urine samples from offenders regularly to track emerging drugs in society, because we had research showing that worked in terms of giving you advance warning of a drug epidemic. So I'm going to be getting back to that in a minute. But anyway, we are running a program like that called the Community Drug Early Warning System, or CDUS. I apologize for the jargon and the alphabet soup, but that's the way it is. And that analyzes urine samples from high-risk populations. So we're able to find out what did people actually take. And there's no one else doing it in the type of scale that we're doing it. And in addition, CSER is the coordinating center for NIDA, NIH, National Drug Early Warning System. And basically, I invite you to go to our website, which is ndus.org, and we have the job of working with experts around the country and trying to keep track of the emerging drugs and putting it out in a way that we disseminate the information on a timely basis. I have with me my Deputy Director, Erin Artigiani, who, if you stump me, she may come over and I may ask her to answer a question. So I want to take a few minutes to focus on the CDUS pilot study we've been doing for ONDCP, that's the Office of National Control Policy. And we collect urine samples from drug testing programs operating in the criminal justice system, treatment, and also treatment settings. And what we found is that most of these programs are testing for the drugs of the last epidemic. And they can't even go, they don't even have the capability to test for the new emerging drugs that we're talking about today. So basically, we collect these sample of these specimens, de-identified, when they're ready to be thrown out, and we send them to a laboratory and test them for 150 substances. So we keep modifying our panel so that we are on top of the latest drugs that we think are coming out. So I have been studying drug problem all the way back to graduate school when we studied the Vietnam veterans to find out if they were going to bring their heroin problem back to the States. And I've been doing a lot of urinalysis studies. I've never seen anything like the problem and the challenge of these synthetic drugs. I used to be able to call a laboratory and say, take these specimens and test for the standard panel. When we started Duff, it was 9 drugs, 9 common drugs. But what happens is that as these new drugs, which are originally legal, as they are put on the federal schedule and made illegal, the people who are creating these tweak the molecule so it's now legal. And so it's really hard to keep up with these substances. And what basically happens is the DEA tracks the parent drug, you know, what's there before it's ingested. We're tracking the metabolite, and you know there's no one-to-one there. When you find one of these new drugs, you don't know how the liver metabolizes it. So then they have to go to NIDA's intramural laboratory, where they can mimic the liver, break down the drug, and then tell the test companies, here's what you need to create to be able to test for this new drug. It's a whole new ballgame. I've never seen it before. So we currently, I have a list here. We started off with 10 substances. We now test for 26 synthetic cannabinoids. We never, by the way, call them synthetic marijuana, because anything that's synthetic usually means it's good, right? This is not marijuana, all right? So we call it synthetic cannabinoids. And these drugs, because they're so new, there's no FDA study. There's no research on them. No one knows what it can do to the body and the brain. It's really dangerous. Okay, so I want to just tell you some of what we've been finding as we go around collecting these urines from high-risk groups. The first thing I want to tell you is the metabolites keep changing. When we got our first time we did this, we called the lab and said, all right, we're going to send the specimens, and we want to test for these 10 metabolites. And they said to us, you know, the people who create this, they've changed it because it's now illegal. You better add these 2 new metabolites. So we added it, so we had 12. If we hadn't added those 2, we would have missed 95% of the positives that we found in that study. Okay? So we literally do a survey of toxicologists around the world and law enforcement and scientists to find out what should be testing for. And sometimes we have to hold the specimens up until the new tests are available. All right? So anyone taking SPICE or K2, so any of these surveys, anyone you talk to, have no idea what they took. 0 idea. All they know is they took something that's packaged in a certain way and someone said it's, quote, synthetic marijuana. They have no idea. Therefore, they're playing Russian roulette with their body. And you see the media reports that have been happening with people coming into the emergency room. So, also, we've gone into Washington, D.C. and done a lot of testing with the PSA group, their pretrial services. The metabolites vary both by site across the country and within site over time. They keep changing, okay, as these new things are done. You know how we say politics is local? Drug use is local. That's why taking an average survey doesn't work in terms of really tracking this. I also want to tell you might think that people with legalization wouldn't use these drugs. Well, legalization makes marijuana expensive. So if you can find these drugs on the street and it's cheaper, they're still using them. They're using them to avoid detection by testing programs. And I was going to come in here and tell you today that this has peaked, because in the D.C. area, the stats are down. And then a couple of weeks ago, a huge outbreak of people going into Austin emergency departments with this problem. And who's using it? The homeless population. It's real cheap. I think that the more educated people have gotten the notice on this and perhaps are not using it. My final things I wanted to say to you is I've looked over the material that you have on the laws, and you talk about specific chemicals. You can't do that. It's obsolete as soon as you do it. In fact, the chemicals you're talking about, we don't find anymore, like JWH18. That's not what people are using. So you need to focus your rules not on the chemical structure, but more on the characteristics of these drugs. How do they look like? What was the intent in selling them? Are they sold to kids? And in fact, some of the jurisdictions now have gotten away from writing laws based on the chemical structure, and instead are saying, all right, if it looks like synthetic cannabinoids, if it's sold like that, if it says it's not for human consumption, if it's more expensive and it's sold for kids, then they have an ability to perhaps close down a retail establishment for a while, all right? It's not based on the actual chemical test. Thank you.
Are you saying that, I'm fascinated by this because, first of all, I did so poorly in chemistry
Yeah.
that my questions may evidence that. But are you saying now, look, you throw out those chemical definitions. They're not working. And what is going to be substituted in its place? I'm trying to sort of follow that.
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you look at the chart. You look at the sentencing guidelines. They look like a chemistry quiz.
Right.
Okay. I don't pay. I never have.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to figure out. However, the law is designed to be exact in this area. That is, you had X, and you're alleged to have X. X has these qualities, you're going to be prosecuted. So you say now X. X is now X plus Y plus Z. It doesn't even look like X.
That's right.
Well, then what are we supposed to do now? What is
I told you I had the easy job. You have the tough job.
Yeah, no. I mean,
I would not base it on.
I'm asking you really this in terms of definition.
Yeah.
So that so that everybody out there knows a definition. What is now the definition that that you're telling Congress, I guess, to use for these drugs?
That's a great question, and I think I'd have to sit down with a lawyer to try and craft something. But it's not based on the chemistry. It's got to be on the intent, how it's marketed, and who's marketing it. And believe me, it's a cat and mouse game. It's like that whack-a-mole game. You take this, you make this illegal. You put penalties on it. They switch it. And it happens so fast. I can't keep up with it. As someone who follows these trends and tries to do it, I can't keep up with it. I have to wait for the chemist to develop the new tests. It's totally a new thing. And just think about it. So even if you read in the newspaper and they say someone took synthetic marijuana, they say, I don't have any idea what the person took. Now, when I talk to people in emergency departments, they're not really bothered too much by this. They treat the symptoms. It doesn't matter which specific chemical they took. They just treat the symptoms. But if you do have a monitoring program, like some of your probation programs are doing testing, what we're able to show as we go into these programs that all the drugs they're missing, and some of them, like we went into Tampa, and we tested juveniles, and we found one, I think UH-144, which they weren't testing for, so now they included in their test panel. DCP trial, based on our research that we did, has now modified and expanded what they test for. So you have to decide the cost-benefit of testing for this. But in terms of writing laws, I don't have a really good answer for you.
Okay. Why don't we hear from Dr. Linder?
Good morning. Again, I'm Chantal Linder, and I manage the DEA Synthetic Drugs and Chemicals section in our headquarters. And what I want to do this morning is kind of give you an overview of the trafficking patterns of the synthetic drugs and kind of what DEA has been doing to combat the problem. So thank you again, and members of the Senate Commission, for opportunity to discuss the threat posed by trafficking and illicit manufacturing of the synthetic drugs, but they are also called NPS. Mostly internationally is what they call new psychoactive substances, is the other name for them. So these substances have flooded the United States, and they not only put adult citizens at risk, but also children for permanent injury or death. And so this is a significant problem for DEA, and is overwhelming our law enforcement. So the synthetic cannabinoids and cathinones are easily available through various outlets. We're talking about the internet, convenience stores, gas stations, street dealers, and drug trafficking organizations, all of those methods. So anyone is easily able to order these substances directly to their doorstep via the internet. They're primarily manufactured in China and imported into the U.S. by a common carrier. They're produced by foreign chemists and shipped into U.S. usually in powder form. And after entering the U.S., the cannabinoids are usually mixed with dissolved with acetone and sprayed in an inert plant material and mixed with flavoring prior to distributing the substances. And the cathinones are commonly sold in capsule, tablet, or powder form. And they're packaged, both of them are packaged for distribution in various brands in a manner that's usually appealing to youth. You have, like, for instance, the Scooby Snacks or Cloud9, very colorful packaging that they usually cater to the younger people. And so they are made in these domestic warehouses locations and then distributed throughout the country. And so the U.S. distributors of these substances, they can range from large multi-scale drug trafficking organizations or to individuals who either package the substance for resale in small quantities or distribute them in kilogram quantities as well. And the business is very lucrative. So, for example, 1 kilogram of synthetic powder can be purchased from China from $2,000 to $5,000 per kilogram. So if that substance is broken down into packages and sold for $20 each at 1 to 2 grams per package, then the traffickers, they stand a profit of approximately $250,000 just for that $2,000 to $5,000 investment. So the process of manufacturing these synthetic drug compounds is very unstable, is what I like to really bring home to you. Because when creating or mixing these substances, there's no regularity or control to the method. So as a result, the substances packaged are at various levels of concentration in one single package, which is what we call hotspots. So what we mean is that you can get one package, and then one portion of that gram package can be a higher concentration than the rest of it, and it can cause death. So as a result, DEAs, we're consistently working with our foreign, state, and local law enforcement partners to impede the synthetic drug trafficking in the U.S. And we've conducted several large-scale investigations that included multiple DEA foreign and domestic offices, and operations such as Operation Logjam and Project Synergy, where we use traditional and covert operations to identify, arrest, and seize the assets of these traffickers. And just for your knowledge, according to the DEA National Forensic Laboratory Information System, or NIFLS, which is a program that I think Dr. Wish talked about, that collects drug identification results from drug cases analyzed by federal, state, and local forensic laboratories, there were 706 total encounters in 2015 and 1,014 total encounters in 2016 for the 5 substances that we are talking about today. They're under consideration at this hearing. We investigated a case in New York where we seized over 5 kilograms of methadone from an organization that obtained the substance from China, and they resold it on the dark web and distributed it throughout the U.S. And from this case resulted in numerous overdoses in students at the University of New Hampshire. We had another case in Lafayette, Louisiana. A defendant sold synthetic substances, including AM-2201. And they had several businesses, and through these businesses, they distributed all these different types of synthetic substances. And the defendants and the co-defendants distributed published instruction to other retail outlets on how to interact with law enforcement, sell and display the substances under the ruse that the substances were not for human consumption. So they were providing guidance to other retail outlets to thwart law enforcement. So our experience shows that the sentencing proceedings for synthetic substances involve lengthy and complex hearings, which multiple scientists opine on the most closely related substances in sentencing guidelines. In this situation, it presents challenges for all the parties, the government, the defense, and the court as well. So it's extremely resource intensive and leads to inconsistent outcomes, as you all know. So therefore, we're in need of your help to establish guideline equivalencies that consider both scientific information and the harms to the community that result from the trafficking of these substances. The various methods of the synthetic drug trafficking has evolved into something that we, law enforcement, has never encountered. And this is one type of drug trafficking that covers all facets, and we cannot narrow it down into one. And we are needing assistance from lawmakers to assist us in this battle. And the DEA is committed to doing everything we can to address the threat, and will continue to work with our foreign and domestic law enforcement partners. So thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to take any questions you may have.
Well, I'd like to ask, do you concur in this rather dark statement that look, they're way ahead of us, and they're continuing changing one molecule or whatever they do to this, and then therefore it's not enforceable against them because it's not in this list?
That's the reality, sir.
Is that your experience?
Yes, sir. As soon as something gets controlled, the traffickers are right, especially in China, we are caught saying that they're ready to prepare to get something different that cannot be seized.
So can you tell us from the DEA's point of view, what actually happens when there's an arrest for what appears to be a drug deal, large quantity of drugs, contraband, and then it's tested and it's found to be, not in this chart, what do you do?
Then we try to use the analog act, where we try to use a comparative substance for as a physiological or a psychological effects and other chemical structure to compare it to use in court.
And how successful has that been, that exercise?
It's been very successful, but there are challenges because of the various testimony that's needed. It becomes a scientific battle at that point between the government and the defense.
Can I ask you, so from our perspective, here's my fear, we're going to have 5 of the drugs that, we're told now we should be studying, and as soon as we issue whatever guidance, there'll be the 5 new ones. And so won't it just mean you're back in court doing the same testimony with the same scientific battle? Because we'll also be behind the curve for this. I just have a hard time figuring out what it is that we at the commission can do that's any different than what you're struggling with, because I can't figure out how we would say drugs like that. I guess, and you have no thoughts on that either.
Yeah, I mean, just like I mentioned, it's a battle we've never seen before. As soon as we, think we have a handle on one drug, they create something else. And then since we don't have a law that covers something with an umbrella effect of it, we keep fighting the same battle.
So if we were to give you guidance on, let's say, 5 of the things that are out there now, whatever whichever one we could identify now, does that move the ball forward for you at all in terms of then the next generation of the new 5 they come up with, because that would be a closer analog than what we currently have, or is it kind of just of a modest effect in terms of helping with this?
Well, I think it helps because it gives us a new comparative, something that's more closely related, because we shouldn't be using marijuana for everything because it's not marijuana at all. So this will allow us to have a better comparative.
Let me just ask a real quick question. Do any of the states come any closer than the feds to trying to develop some law that would capture this at all? Are there any states, is there any guidance at all?
Yes, there are some states that have state laws that have, like I mentioned before, kind of like an umbrella effect for the synthetic drugs. I'm not versed on how they write it, but they do write it in a way where it doesn't include individual substances, like the same effects or the same, I don't
marketing
know.
and
yes,
same.
so some states do have.
Do you know which ones?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Not offhand, no.
That would be helpful.
You have the Washington, D.C. program I mentioned, which basically allows them to shut down a retail establishment that appears to be selling a synthetic cannabinoid.
I'm familiar with that. And they also, additionally, there's a problem with those people tested under supervision and on parole, because we can't catch them, because the drugs, we have a certain number of drugs that we're testing for, and we know they're on something, but we can't figure out what it is because it's one of these substances. It's really difficult.
And we have problems with the presumptive test, too, in the field, because it keeps changing.
Because we're looking at this targeted population, youths, should we be looking at this more in terms of an aggravating factor when we come in contact with synthetic drugs as opposed to the traditional drugs? We're trying to compare, I know you don't like to use the term synthetic marijuana, but to marijuana. Should the synthetic version have some aggravating factor over and above the comparable drug? Does that discourage production rather than allow the producers to change the molecule?
There's no scientific clinical evidence on these drugs. It just can't. It takes a while to give people these specific drugs and to see what the impact is. And there is nothing like that for the synthetics. They have a short history. That's the problem. In fact, I know it's beyond your purview, but perhaps what we can do is launch something like we did about crack cocaine. This is your brain on drugs. Remember that type of thing, and educate the population about this Russian roulette issue, that you really don't know what you're taking and that it's incredibly dangerous. The numbers of people that go into an emergency department in a locality over a weekend because they all use the same thing is just, it's startling to see these statistics. And you just don't know, because I say it has multiple things in it, it keeps changing. You can't really say whether it will affect you one way or you another way. It's just that it doesn't exist.
Well, I want to thank you for your presentations this morning. And
can I add one thing? Because
sure.
I listened to your committee. You're listening to drug courts, and you're listening to people talk about drug treatment. And what I want you to be aware of, we found this with the Vietnam veterans who used heroin. The people who used heroin used everything else. In other words, the people, and I've replicated this in many populations, the people who use the less, I'll say rare, R-A-R-E, drugs, right, have used everything else. We recently, for NIDA, we did a hotspot study of fentanyl overdose death people in New Hampshire. And they sent us the urines, 136 urines, and when we ran it through this 150 drug screen, the average number of drugs in these people when they died was close to 4. And so we like, as a society, to blame the demon drug. We've been doing this my whole career, but it really isn't about the drug. It's about the person using it and having this type of a disorder. And so what I would urge the committee to do is when you start reviewing treatment programs, look for treatment programs that look at the whole person, that acknowledge the fact that the person using heroin is probably using a whole lot of other drugs, and you need to address, if you want to be successful, you need to address the whole panoply of drugs the person's using and not blame it on one drug.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wish. Thank you, Dr. Linder.